For more than a century, some of us have been captivated by the miniature world of the model railway. A land of tiny, detailed wagons and scaled-down stations. It's a world that once gripped the imagination of children.
I saw the shape of the box and I thought, ooh, that's a Hornby 00 train set.
Model railways were shaped by our love of the steam age.
It's an incredible visual spectacle. The only way you can recreate that is by having a model railway.
It was a hobby that drew fathers close to sons.
You don't get changed out of your school or your work clothes. You sit down immediately with your dad and engage in, running some locomotives.
And a fascination that lasted a lifetime.
You may go off it at times when you find your wife. She may, take a bit of your time up, and then the first child comes along, and guess what you think about? Oh, I think I'll build a model railway.
This isn't the story of eccentrics in duffel coats hiding in lofts. Railway modelling is bigger than that, and about much more than just trains.
The way that industry, economics, technology impacts on our social and cultural life. I would argue for a reclaiming of rail enthusiasm as something which we should celebrate now instead of just being suspicious of.
That's spot on, that is.
The British love of model railways is etched into our historical obsession with the real thing. Britain invented the railway and it became a source of national pride. But more than anything else, steaming through British identity is the drama of the locomotive.
Seeing a steam engine go past on the main line at high speed is something that leaves a real mark on you. It's elemental.
You saw coming in this huge piece of iron that was on fire, smoke belching out. I mean, I used to grip my father's hand and think, what's that?
Steam issuing out from underneath. The whole thing is alive.
You put your hand on it and it's quivering like a horse as the water boils.
The thrashing of the rods as it goes along at 100 miles an hour. It's an incredible visual spectacle. The only way you can recreate that is by having a model railway. It gives you a little taste of that same feeling, and it triggers off the memories of seeing these beasts flying around.
For Pete Waterman, capturing that railway atmosphere has been a lifelong pursuit.
Leamington's where I started spotting in 1951. It's where my mum took me and stood me on the station while she went off with my auntie shopping, £0.50 to the guy in the buffet to get me a cup of tea when I wanted one. And I spent from about 51 to 63 at Leamington Spa. I mean, it's what I did.
Leamington also had other attractions for Pete and his fellow modelling club members. It was an area where different railway companies all converged in one place.
You've got the LMS on that side, you've got the Great Western on this side, but you also got L&WR and L&ER and Southern trains through the station. So for a modeller, the world's your oyster, you can build anything. It's all signalled correctly and all the signals work. And there are complicated junctions. The problem we found when we built the layout, of course, we're over-enthusiastic. So, as you can see, if anything falls off in the middle, we don't run any of that, because if it falls off, you can't reach it. And also on the railway, I've got things like this. I actually own the real one of these tanks. So, there's a bit of self-indulgent that I'm playing with my own train, but I never get time to go and see the real thing, but I get time to play with the model. Everything's handmade. There's there's 1,500 weight of ballast all put in by with a paintbrush. You know, it's never ending. It won't ever be finished, but it keeps us modelling.
Modelling first got going in the Edwardian age, when a young entrepreneur called Wenman J. Bassett-Lowke began to produce models that fed on our passion for locomotives. He would stoke up a fascination with model railways in Britain that has lasted more than 100 years. Bassett-Lowke's genius was to miniaturise the engineering wonder of his day at a time when railways were at their peak.
The Edwardian period before the First World War was arguably the golden age of railways in Britain. And these locomotives are like the jet aircraft of today. Passenger services were unparalleled. You know, finely decorated locomotives, exquisitely decorated coaches. You could get pretty well everywhere in the United Kingdom by train. When you combine that with this general attitude towards railways as being cutting-edge technology, then it's quite easy to understand why some people, some members of the public, men mostly it has to be said, become interested in representing this kind of cutting-edge technology in miniature form.
Wealthy men of leisure wanted to feel that they had a stake in the great railway enterprise. What better way than through a scaled-down version? Bassett-Lowke introduced them to the new model world.
He loved modern engineering, he loved structures. Aircraft, he loved aircraft.
Bassett-Lowke was a man of his time. He was a Victorian entrepreneur.
He made his first money by selling black and white pictures of a train crash in Northampton.
Bassett-Lowke's father was a boilermaker and engineer, but Wenman didn't want to follow in his footsteps. For him, the future lay in a much smaller world.
He spotted that people wanted to mimic the real railway, and he was the first to make, they weren't toys, they would be classed as engineering art pieces for people who could wanted a bit more for their garden. You know, so he saw that there were all these posh blokes out there who would like a model railway that could afford his locomotives.
In 1900, there were over 100 railway companies competing for the public's attention, and steam fans all had their favourite locomotives. There was a kaleidoscope of colours and liveries, and if Bassett-Lowke could offer replicas of choice locomotives, the market was his for the taking. On a trip to the continent, the 22-year-old saw what he needed to do.
Bassett-Lowke originally imports his trains from Germany, in particular from Nuremberg in Germany, which is the capital of wonderful toy makers who make these scaled-down trains, wonderful objects.
And he set up the company that really started what we now class as model railways. Without doubt, he set it all up.
He would take these German toys, make them look like realistic versions of British trains, and sell them as models for adults, earning a mint in the process. His first attempt was the Black Prince locomotive, which was over 2 feet long and cost around £500 in today's money, which didn't even include any track.
Looking at his catalogues, you will notice he never ever uses the word toy trains. It doesn't come into it. Model railways, models, model steam engines, it's the whole thing is based on models. They were very expensive, they were far too elaborate for children. Yes, they were grown-up gentlemen's toys, that's what they were.
The distinction between toy and model was an important one to Bassett-Lowke's clients. His models were detailed, engineered, accurate depictions of real locomotives. The scientific man about town couldn't be seen to be playing with toys.
It's about mechanics, it's educational, it's about engineering, science, mathematics. It's about self-improvement through building things.
For Bassett-Lowke's customers, it was all about having the money to buy the trains and the space to run them. For his larger engines, a billiards room, estate gardens, or perhaps an old tennis court would do the trick. But Bassett-Lowke had even bigger ambitions. His locomotives weren't all for watching go round a track on the floor. His miniature ride-on trains were models for millionaires. They pushed shrunken-down steam engineering to its limits and ran through stately homes or served as tourist attractions at the seaside. For his smaller models, power was provided by steam, early electricity, or even clockwork, a somewhat hit-and-miss method of propulsion.
Some of the big engines had enormous clockwork mechanisms. There was one, it was so powerful this would pull a kid. It obviously had distinct disadvantages. You wound it up and set it off on your layout on this hopeful journey. It was going to arrive in Peterborough or somewhere, and it of course wound up stopping in a tunnel.
For such a young capitalist, Bassett-Lowke was an enigma. He was a fan of the arts and crafts movement and hung out with George Bernard Shaw. He championed workers' rights and commissioned radical modern artwork.
Bassett-Lowke is a fascinating man. Politically, he's on the left. He's a Fabian. He's a pacifist. His house in Northampton was designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh. It's the last great Mackintosh house.
Wenman was a man of progressive ideals, but one who knew his market.
He was servicing a very particular clientele, the filthy rich.
I mean, the Bassett-Lowke who's who of the time was very interesting. I mean, Churchill, Walt Disney, all sorts of people like this were clients of the Bassett-Lowke showroom, members of the royal family. So his left aspect seems to be a little bit, bit awry there.
By 1912, business was booming. He was opening new shops, and the rich couldn't get enough of his German-built trains. Model railways had arrived.
In 1914, I think it was the imports from German toy factories were £1 million at 1914 values. It's a huge sum. And of course that was cut off with the war.
When the war ended in 1918, money was tight, and Bassett-Lowke had lost many of his clients. The landscape for his miniature locomotives had changed.
A lot of the wealthy middle or upper class people who could afford these fine early models would have been fighting in the war, and many of them, unfortunately, would have been killed.
This was, of course, the time when the largest number of country houses went on the market in a 5-year period that Britain ever knew. And lots of people lost a lot of money. So the market for the size of the market that people like Lowke were serving went down.
The large trains, which had been so successful before the war, had become a liability.
They were so expensive, they just sat in his showrooms in Holborn and in Manchester, etc., and Northampton, and they were not selling because they were frankly too expensive.
Even worse,